I mean, no one knows what the future holds, but if you can, in your gut, feel there's a good shot that other doors are going to be open, you always go for the look, not the money. There's going to be a lot of people rushing into this space in the next couple of years, and then it's going to become a really cold winter, and a lot of people are going to fall off, but you just got to tough it out and be one of the people left standing on the other side. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Hey, this is Raina Campbell, your Chief Dream Driver, and welcome to the No Parking Podcast, where through conversations and discussions with creators like yourself, we'll find interesting approaches to help you take your dreams out of park, put them in drive, and ride towards success. Hey, Dream Drivers, welcome to episode 173 of the Dreams and Drive podcast. And today, our guest is Chris Morrow. Let's kick off this episode, though, by talking about doing well and doing good. Our episode partner today is DKMS, which is an international nonprofit that has been helping people who are battling blood cancers and blood disorders all over the world. DKMS registers bone marrow donors and have registered over 8 million potential donors and facilitated over 70,000 bone marrow donations for patients in need. And we're going to talk a little bit later on in the episode about sickle cell disease and how patients of color often have a hard time finding bone marrow matches. You can learn more about DKMS and how you can help save more lives in need today by texting DKMS to 50555 or go to dkms.org. So today's guest, Chris Morrow, is the CEO and co-founder of Loudspeakers Network, which is the home to some of your favorite podcasts, including The Read, The Friend Zone, Casey Crew, Brilliant Idiots, Lip Service, The Combat Jack Show. I met Chris at Podcast Movement, so it's a pleasure to have him on the show talking about his experience. And we had such a great conversation about how he came up in the industry, what it was like building Loudspeakers Network with Reggie Osei, aka Combat Jack, tips for creators in the space on how to find your own niche, how to get creative with advertising and partnerships, and why he believes tapping into Generation Z's influence is going to be super important for the future of podcasting. But what I love the most about this convo with Chris was he really emphasized how it took him 10 years to get his big break. So for all my drivers, all my hustlers, all my goal-getters, this is a reminder to keep putting in the work. And Chris also gets a bit personal towards the end of the show and opens up about prioritizing health and wellness and his own battle with Lyme disease. So this is a really great episode. I know you guys are going to enjoy it. Remember to follow us on social. We are Dreams and Drive across the board on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can also use the hashtag Dreams and Drive. And if you like this episode, if you feel like it's something that you think others need to listen to, please share it with a friend. I love it when you guys are screenshotting and sharing on Instagram stories, posting about it, tweeting, LinkedIn messaging, Facebooking. Do whatever you want to do to share, but please share it with just one person today. I am asking you. All right, let's get into the episode. Hope you guys enjoy. Hi, Chris. Welcome to this episode of Dreams and Drive. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
So we met back in July at Podcast Movement via Barry of Podcast in Color. Barry's my girl.
That's right. I wasn't going to go, and at the last minute, I decided to come down. And actually, the talk we ended up having was one of the better moments, I'd say, of the festival.
Yeah, definitely. I know I was with Janicia and Queen of Tea with Queen and Jay and Dr. Joy of Therapy for Black Girls. I forgot who else was there, but that conversation was definitely one that I remember too. Just because when you go to those type of events, you always go there with like an expectation, and when things don't really meet what you thought you were gonna get out of it, you always kind of get a little disappointed. But your conversation gave me a little bit of hope, right? All of us a little bit of hope about we're not alone in feeling like this.
Sure.
So I like to start the interviews going back in time. I feel like it's really important for us to kind of just think about like who we were as kids. So let's go back to 8-year-old Chris.
Wow.
How would you describe yourself as like an 8-year-old child? What was inspiring you back then? What was the world like through your eyes?
Wow, that's really interesting. I was talking about this with my wife over the weekend because my daughter, I have two daughters, one's 9 and one just turned 11. And, I was trying to think about comparing what they're like and what they're going through and how I was like as a kid. And then we were with my nephew, who's everyone was saying reminded me, who's 8, and everyone was saying that he reminded everyone of how I was at that age. So I think I was shy, first and foremost. I was a pretty shy kid with a goofy streak. So you would either get me not talking or acting pretty goofy. I grew up in Philadelphia, just kind of like a fairly traditional, I'd say, like middle-class background. You know, I had a very fortunate childhood, you know, in retrospect, as I look back on it. You know, close relationship with my family, with my parents, you know, supportive community I grew up in. In terms of passions, you know, I was into sports and, you know, basketball, baseball, like most of the other kids in my neighborhood. I was a little bit of a nerd, so I would say...
What was your nerd thing? Like, what was that thing that
history.
You geeked out on? Okay.
History was definitely my thing. Like, you know, there was like a little bit of like a rough element in my neighborhood too, and there were some kids who were pretty tough. They had a little gang when we were like 10, and I was a little afraid of them. And they were coming up, you know, they wanted to come up with the name of the gang, and I was kind of on the outskirts. They didn't really fuck with me that much. And I was a history nerd, so I've been reading about Teddy Roosevelt during the Spanish-American Civil War, and he named his troops the Rough Riders. So I came downstairs one day after I've been reading, and I was like, hey, you should call this gang the Rough Riders. And that was a big hit, and that's how I got into it. So I wanted to put a record.
So you were in a gang at 10 years old?
I mean, when I say a gang, I mean a bunch of kids riding around Philadelphia on dirt bikes. But, you know, we'd throw rocks at people or something. It was nothing too serious. But I did come up with the Rough Rider tag before the Bronx Collective. I want to stake my claim right there.
You got to tell what Swiss Beats.
Yeah.
So what was the dream then? Like, as you grew older, as you know, getting older through these Philadelphia streets, like, what did you envision the adult Chris looking like, or becoming?
I never, you know, even to this day, I don't know what the adult Chris is going to look like. I'm still trying to figure it out. You know, I'd say I always, you know, there was a time I thought I might be a history professor when I was young. And then, you know, as I was a teenager, I got really into hip hop, and, you know, I was actually thinking about trying to do something in that. I had a little group in Philly, and, you know, we were trying to figure it out. It never really panned out, but I kind of knew from that point on that I wanted to do something kind of connected to the culture and music in general. That's really, I don't know how to play anything. I'm not a musician, but I've always had a real strong passion for music and music culture.
So when you went to Vassar, right? Looking back at it, do you feel like your degree was worth it? Like, would you have gone back would you do college again if you could?
Nah, I mean, to bring it back to my family again, I've already told my kids, you know, if you want to go to college, you guys really got to lock it down in high school and study, because I just don't see the value in it anymore. You know, when I went to Vassar, I think the tuition was $25,000 a year, which was certainly a lot. But I just went back for my reunion, and, you know, it's $75,000 a year right now.
What?
So, like, I don't see it just doesn't seem worth it to invest $500,000, assuming your parents have $500,000 in the first place, to come out in a lot of debt without any guarantee of a job. Because the way, you know, and I'm talking about people who are interested in things similar to me, media, the arts, right? If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be a lawyer, an engineer, something that needs a very specific type of degree, then I guess, yeah, college is still something you're going to have to do. But for everybody else, a liberal arts education, I don't see the value in it, simply because I don't see the jobs that are waiting for you on the other side of it. When I went to college, there was still kind of a system in place. You know, if you wanted to be a reporter, you worked for your high school newspaper. Then you went to college and you were on your college paper, and if you were good, you became the editor. And then you came out and you went to a regional newspaper for a few years, and you worked your way up, and then hopefully you may be able to make it to like New York or another big city, and that's how you kick off your career. That's dead now.
Yeah.
None of that's, you know, like, if you want to do something, you do it.
They say
You know?
like media companies now are like one person run media companies, right? Where the influencer or the brand itself is the, like whoever, like let's say I'm thinking of like the first person who popped in my head was Shiggy. You know how he did the whole, In My Feelings challenge, whatever that was is. Like he's a media empire. Like his reach is probably bigger than a lot of these smaller media entities with funding and all this other stuff. But it's just so funny how that whole landscape really has changed.
You know, it's changed for the better, and it's scarier in some ways. I mean, I think it's scary not knowing that there's a path you can follow, and you know, if everything goes right, achieve some sort of success. But I'd say on the flip side, like if you're a kid coming up and you have like a real vision and a passion, you just got to pour it all into that, and you'll be all right. Because I think by the time my daughters are old enough to go on interviews, people aren't going to be asking, you know, what degree do you have or where it's from. It's going to be how many followers do you have or whatever the platforms are going to look like in 10 years. That's going to matter as much to people.
That's scary.
It is scary. But if you have something that you're really serious about and you can see it when you're 17 or 18, it almost makes more sense to start going for it then instead of sinking $600,000-$700,000, assuming you even have that, into an education that's really not guaranteeing you anything. I hate to say it.
And even the brand names, like I know some people will probably be rolling their eyes when they hear this, but you know, I went to Princeton, right? And I always say to myself, if I had to pay, because I had like Princeton's financial aid is really, really good. So I really paid basically nothing to go there for the 4 years. But it's like, if I didn't have that financial aid, would I really put myself in like hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt just to go there?
Princeton might still be worth it, you know. Like I would say,
because the name
like
brand, right? But I feel like the education itself, for me, it was like, because I was a sociology major and I genuinely love reading, like, and that's all my courses were, like you read and you write a paper, right? I feel like it really depends on what you're trying to do. But okay, I guess it would be worth it because of the brand name itself and the level.
Vassar's not going to be worth it. Sorry, Vassar, but you know, on that level, and you know, Vassar's a good school, but what did a school like Vassar really give me? Or you know, it gives you connections. You meet people, right?
That's so true.
And I think that's what a lot of people get from college is the connect. You know, my wife went to Vassar. We didn't really know each other that well then, but you know, we ran in the same circles, and you know, that's kind of what you get from college is the connection. And I think social media, you know, is gonna make that not as important going forward.
You can connect with anyone if they just answer your DMs, right? It's like you're only a DM away if they accept it. So what was your big break? You know, you said you were interested in hip hop and media. When was that moment where you actually like found your pocket and got in?
It was a struggle. It took a while. When I graduated from college, I was teaching for, I think, a year or two. And then that didn't really pan out. And then I got a job at a publishing company, but they put me in the marketing department, which really wasn't the right spot for me. So I was kind of always looking for a way to get kind of closer, you know, to hip hop or the music or the stuff I was into. So I think the first kind of break is I kept pitching stuff. I wrote an article about a guy named John Forte. I don't know if you remember him. For the Source magazine. He'd been an associate of the Fugees, and he got caught up in a cocaine ring, and he got busted, and it was kind of like a wild and crazy case. So I wrote a big expose on that for the Source, kind of when the Source was, you know, the Bible still. And that made a little bit of noise, and then I got a job working for Clear Channel, kind of writing a daily hip-hop news report for them that got sent around to stations around the country. So that I made some contacts through that. And then through that, I got introduced to Russell Simmons because he had a kind of daily hip-hop positive message that was airing on Power 105 in New York in the mornings, and they needed a writer for that. I got introduced to him, and we kind of hit it off, and I started writing those for him every morning, and then through that, we built a relationship. You know, we were writing these scripts every day, and eventually, after maybe 5 or 6 months, I was like, yo, we should just turn these into a book. And he was like, yeah, I'm with it. So we wrote a book that was called Do You, and that became a bestseller. I
remember that. Yeah. Wow, okay.
And that kind of was, I guess, my big break. But, I mean, that whole process took 12, 13 years. I mean, there were a lot of...
Years?
Yeah. But,
for one book? Or just...
No. I mean, the process of coming out of college, kind of getting into the industry and then actually feeling like, all right, now I'm here, you know. Yeah, it was probably about 12, 13 years.
You know, it's funny. I hear this debate all the time. So I'm considered a millennial, right? And it's like the other people from the generation above, they're always like, you know, millennials, they just want everything to happen so fast. So I'm 5 years out of college. And for me to hear that, it's like 12 years is when you felt like you finally got it, right? It's like, all right, Raina, don't rush yourself. Because I feel like a lot of us sometimes...
Well, I wanted it. I'm not saying that I was happy not having it during those 10 years or so. Like, I was very aware of the fact that I wasn't breaking in, but I just kind of kept my head down and kept plugging.
What kept you motivated, though?
I didn't really have anything else that I was that interested in, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like, all right, I'm going to go to law school, or I'm going to be like, those have never been my thing. You know, music and the culture has always been my passion. And I was just close enough to it that, you know, I felt like I could do it. I just kept trying to figure out, you know, what's the angle, what's the break. But, you know, even with the Russell Simmons thing, you know, I tell this story too, especially, you know, in terms of the conversation about millennials and always wanting everything right away. So when I went to him and said, let's do the book, he's Russell, he's a hustler. Of course, the first thing he said was, oh, yeah, I've been planning to do that already. So I said, all right. So I said, okay, fine, whatever. He got a book agent, and then I got a book agent. And I forget what the particulars of the deal were, but basically after some negotiation, my agent came back to me and was like, this is BS. Like, don't do this. This isn't the right way to go about it. It's not a good deal. Just walk away and we'll find you something else. And, you know, that was probably in some ways good advice. But I said to her, I said,
Russell Simmons.
I said, I'm going to walk away to what? To go home and be watching the NBA eating Chinese food every night of the week again? No, like this is my shot. Like, it might be a bad deal and I might be getting taken advantage of, but like, I'm doing this. Like, and they actually ended up not paying me until the book was published even, which is unheard of. Like, I just basically worked on it for free, you know, the entire time. It was probably close to a year-long process. And it's funny, I was actually just talking to someone yesterday who's about to go on their honeymoon. And they were like, where'd you go on your honeymoon? And I was like, I didn't go on a honeymoon. And they were like, why not? I was like, because 2 days after, you know, married, I had to go meet Russell to work on this book because it was the only window he had. And that's what I did. And, you know, my wife still, you know, kind of prods me about it today, but I saw it as a shot. And, you know, I'd been kind of struggling and trying to get on long enough that I was just like, I'm not going to let the money get in the way. And I, you know, I had a job during that time, so I could afford to wait to get paid. But I was just like, I'm not letting this go. Like, I'm going to do it no matter what it takes, because I don't know if another opportunity like this is going to come across my plate anytime soon, if ever.
That makes a lot of sense. But like, do you ever think there are times when you should walk away? And if so, like, what would have made it so that you were like, all right, yeah, I can't do this anymore?
You know, part of it was kind of a gut feeling about the situation, where that, you know, like, on one hand, yeah, Russell is somebody who would like try to get me to sign a deal that wasn't so great off the bat. But I also saw enough people around him during the course of time that I was working with him that I saw like he took care of people, right? So I was like, yeah, he might screw me a little bit, but in the big picture, it's all right because there's going to be benefits, you know, for me. And that's kind of how I saw it. You know, like, everything doesn't come down to money at the end of the day, right? You know, I saw a situation where I was like, look, if I can pull this off and write a bestseller with Russell Simmons, that's going to open up a lot more doors down the road for me. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So even if I don't get paid what I want for this particular gig, and then at the end, I ended up getting something, you know, probably close to what it was worth. But I was like, even if that doesn't happen, I can see pretty clearly where it's going to lead to more stuff in the future. And I think the time you have to walk away is if you can't see that, right? Yeah. If you're just like, this is a one-time shot, someone's trying to get over on me, and I just don't see this leading anywhere else, then you walk away. I think if I mean, no one knows what the future holds, but if you can, in your gut, feel there's a good shot that other doors are going to be open, you always go for the look, not the money.
Have you ever had a situation where someone saw something in you where they're like, Chris, I think you'd be a good chef. Come be a chef for my team. And you had to hesitate about whether or not that was the right move for where you wanted to go in your career?
You mean an actual chef? Because I can't cook.
No. I just mean I'm just trying to say, was there ever anyone who saw something?
Well, yeah. Once after you get on, then it becomes tougher because then you have people coming at you all the time, right? And I personally have a hard time saying no. So those conversations are always difficult for me. So yeah, then once you get a little bit of success, then a lot of people want to work with you. And then it becomes a matter of just kind of finding a way out of situation. I never want to insult anybody. I never want to hurt anybody's feelings. So I'm always looking for a way to do it diplomatically. But yeah, sure. There've been plenty of examples of moments like that. I mean, I don't want to say who they are, but I've had some very big names on the books writing side of things come after me, and I can just tell it's not going to work. But those are also people that I'm like, you just don't tell these people no.
Why not? Why not? Why is it hard for you to tell people no?
Because I usually kind of see the best in people or want to see the best in people. So if someone sells me on something, and this is why it's important, this is why they want to do it, and they're really passionate, I kind of can get caught up in that a little bit. But I also have a cynical side that kind of keeps me a little bit more grounded, so I can see, all right, maybe this is BS. I just think you try to be diplomatic and strategic. And again, I can't say who it is, but for instance, somebody wanted me to write a book, and I was like, I really don't want to do this. I don't think I'm going to vibe with this person, but it's a person who's not used to hearing no, rather. So I'm back and I said, listen, I got another book due with Russell, and Russell's a powerful guy who's used to being the king of his world, and you're a powerful guy who's used to being the king of your world. And because the guy was like, yeah, don't worry, you can work on both books at the same time. It's not realistic. You know that you're the center of your universe, and you're not going to want to share me with somebody else. And we can say that now, but you're going to get frustrated. Everyone's going to get frustrated. It's not going to end well. So why don't I help you find someone else who doesn't have a project right now, but I would think would be a good fit. And I'll be more of a executive producer. I'll be a resource to them, and they can lean on me because I have a little bit more experience. And, I'll help you through the process, but it won't all fall on my shoulders. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. And it ended up working out really well for everybody instead of me just saying no.
Oh, that's such a good way to that. I like that you did it that way. That's actually something I've been struggling with so I recently transitioned from my full-time position, and I'm now working on Dreams and Drive, trying to figure out what the next right thing for me is. So I recently had someone come up to me, and they knew that I'm in this transition mode, and they're like, hey, Raina, I think you should be my publicist. And I'm just and in my head, I thought about it for a second, because I'm I have the skills, I could do this, but is that really in line with the long-term stuff? And I wrestled with it for a whole weekend, and I had to just come back and be right now, this is not the fit, because I know myself, you don't always have to say yes. So it's something that I'm struggling with. That's why I wanted to ask you about what have you done?
It's always a struggle. Yeah. I mean, for me, I know, on the flip side, I know a lot of people who say no very easily without a second thought, and I'm always a little envious of them. But we know, part of the process is kind of figuring out who you are and being comfortable with it. And I know that's who I am now, so I don't beat myself up for struggling with it. I just kind of try to figure out a way to handle each situation as it comes up. And, if something's really out of pocket, you say no quicker, but that's who I am. And I think everyone's just kind of got to get comfortable with who they are. There's no one way to do it. There's no cookie cutter response for every situation.
That's so true. I even think about with podcasting. As a podcaster, you're always listening to other people's podcasts, and you're comparing yourself. And when I edit my shows, I'm like, why do I do this little giggle, right? I have this giggle that I do sometimes when I'm editing. And I tried for so long for to just edit myself while I'm talking to people and not do it. And then I'm like, you know what, Raina? F that. That's your thing. You just giggle sometimes, right? So it's embracing those parts of yourself, because there's more energy in fighting who you are than embracing who you are, right? You spend more energy the other way.
Right. And especially with podcasting, I mean, I feel ultimately people respond to podcasts where they feel like they're getting that person or as close to that person as, someone can open up on a show. So for better or for worse, if that giggle's part of who you are, you got to giggle.
See, I just did it right now. So let's talk about loudspeakers. Tell me about the day you, Reggie, well, it probably wasn't a day, but how did it come to be? Like, what was the genesis, or what was the moment where you guys were like, let's try to get this started?
No, I remember the moment. It started with the Combat Jack show. How I met Reggie, and the Combat Jack show was a thing before I got involved. I was a fan of it first.
Classic.
And I just really loved it. I was working in radio at the time, and, I was getting older and I didn't really feel a connection as much with the music I was working with and the artists I was reporting on. And then I heard this podcast and I was like, well, it wasn't a podcast at the time. It was an internet radio show. And I said, oh man, this is exactly what I'm looking for. These guys are my age. They're having my experiences. Reggie had a family, just kind of like a similar POV. So I was, a pretty regular listener. And then, again, going back to social media can make those connections. He tweeted, anybody in radio, I need help. I don't know what I'm doing. Because Reggie had always seen it as an internet radio show. So I DM'd him back, I guess. And I was like, hey, I'm not really a radio guy, but I work in radio. I know a little bit about the game. I'm in Brooklyn. Would you want to, grab a coffee or something? He was like, absolutely, let's do it. So we met up for coffee, and it turned out we knew a lot of mutual people. I'd played basketball with his cousins and lived next door to them for years. So we probably had even met before. We didn't realize it. So it was one of those things we connected over social media. But then once we met in person, we were like, oh, okay. I know you, you know me. It's, we can vibe. So we hit it off. And, I kind of came on as a producer of the show specifically. And then once I became the producer of the show, I kind of said, because I had been listening to podcasts at the time. This was still fairly early on in the whole podcast game, There was nothing quite like it. It's the Real had a show, which I'm blanking on the name of it now, with Jensen Karp and Peter Rosenberg.
I know what you're talking about.
I'm blanking.
I'm blanking too.
I actually just had this argument with someone the other day that was like, Combat Jack Show was the first hip hop podcast, and I was like, not quite. Very close to the beginning, but not quite. But anyway, I started working with him, and I told Reggie, stop thinking of this as an internet radio show, because the internet radio show is always going to be seen as second rate. You're going to be seen as guys who want to be on Power or want to be on Hot 97 in New York, but aren't good enough to get on. If you make it a podcast, you're out in front of the entire, lane right now. Now own it. Just call it a podcast. And he was like, all right, that makes sense. It's a podcast. So
he wasn't on Apple Podcasts yet. You had to stream it through the internet.
It was weird. He had a relationship with a internet radio company down in Dumbo that I'm blanking on the name of this one too, that doesn't exist anymore. And it was kind of a little bit of a choppy transition where he might have already started putting it on iTunes, but he was still calling it an internet radio show. And they were PNC. That was the name of the place, PNC. They were doing it live, but then reposting it on Apple. So I was like, look, just let's make this a podcast and just own it and embrace it. So that's what happened. And they ended up kind of being at the forefront of that movement. And then there were a lot of people on the show. There were a lot of cast members, and there was always a lot of back and forth. And this person wants to do this, and and it was a lot of intrapersonal drama. And I remember we were having a meeting at Ben Hameen's house, who was the DJ of the Combat Jack show at the time and now hosts Fan Bros. It's just look, you guys can keep fighting over this. I just want to create an entire network. Let's not just make this one show. Let's do a whole network of shows. And I talked to Reggie about it, and he was like, let's do it. So that's how we started Loudspeakers.
So what was the biggest challenge as you guys were launching? Because did you have any experience launching a network before?
No. It was we had no idea what we were doing. The biggest...
And you came together because he had no idea what you were doing. So now you guys created something where you both had no idea, right?
We were completely making it up as we were going along. And look, if looking back, I do a million things differently, but who knows how it would have turned out then. So everything was completely made up day by day, minute by minute. The biggest issue is we needed a place to record. And through my connections in radio, I still won't say where it was, but I was able to get access to like one of the best studios in New York City, where they had a couple studios. So they went from PNC, which was like another kind of startup thing with, truthfully not the best equipment and a lot of technical issues, into now all of a sudden we're in like this pristine studio with fantastic mics and an incredible engineer. So the one advantage I think we kind of had right out the gate is we sounded really good, right?
And that's important. So important.
That's all. It's an audio experience. So all of a sudden, even if you peel back the layer and you could see inside, we don't know what we're doing. We sounded like we knew what we were doing. We sounded super professional. We also had a location that seemed very legitimate. So now, instead of asking people to come to a warehouse in Dumbo, though all these years later, a warehouse in Dumbo is probably pretty legit.
Right? That's now the place to be.
The Soho House, right? But like literally right around the corner from what's now Soho House. But we had a really nice address. And you could kind of see it. Like when people started coming up, they were like, oh shit, like you guys are really doing it. Now they didn't know that I was sneaking people in at night after everybody else left, and it was totally, illegal essentially. But it gave us that veneer, if nothing else, of being a legitimate operation. And then from that, we were able to gain a lot of momentum.
From like the business and the operation standpoint, then, like, how were you guys thinking about the structure of the network? Or were you just solely based on getting the content there?
It was all content. And it's like, I feel like a rock star thinking about the early 60s, right? Before it all broke. But it was only 6-7 years ago, but that's what it feels like. We weren't thinking about money or how much ads this is going to get or who's going to get paid what. We just were making shows. It was kind of like a very innocent, in retrospect, period. Like we just wanted to make shows that people would listen to and enjoy. And that was all the thought was about the content back then. Now it's almost the reverse, right? Now it's everything in podcasting is about money and CPMs and, this and that. We didn't think about any of that stuff back there because there wasn't ever really a sense that it was going to head in that direction. We just wanted to make shows that people were going to listen to.
How did you choose who you were going to bring on to the network in the beginning?
Well, I think I always wanted to do more shows. I didn't know what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, but I did believe that there was an audience out there and that we would end up kind of where we are today. So I always knew I wanted to do that. In terms of the show, specifically, each one of them, it was kind of just like come up with an idea or find a personality that we thought was interesting and just give it a shot. We weren't paying for studio space. We kind of had the flexibility just to do what we wanted and to see what worked or what didn't work. And there was a lot of stuff that didn't work.
All right, so we're going to take a little break from the episode to hear more from our episode partner, DKMS. And one of the things I want to talk about today is sickle cell disease. Now, if you're a person of color, you probably know somebody who has battled sickle cell disease or is battling sickle cell disease. I know I have a god brother who growing up, well, he still has sickle cell, and it's just a painful disease to watch somebody suffer from. And also, it's painful for the person who is suffering from it. So basically, patients with sickle cell disease have red blood cells containing abnormal hemoglobin, which causes the cells to become stiff and form a sickle or a crescent shape. And so because it's difficult for those sickle-shaped cells to pass through small blood vessels, the flow of blood is sometimes blocked and oxygen cannot reach their nearby tissues. Many sickle cell patients have to frequently get blood transfusions, and the bone marrow transplant is the only known cure for sickle cell disease. But a well-matched donor is needed to have the best chance for a successful transplant. African Americans are highly underrepresented on the bone marrow registry, accounting for only 7% of all registrants. So because a patient's best chance of finding a matching bone marrow donor is with someone of similar ancestry, African Americans with sickle cell disease have a harder time finding a bone marrow match. So if you want to find out if you're a match, if you want to learn more about the process, all you have to do is text DKMS to 50555 or go to dkms.org in order to get your free swab kit. You swab your cheeks, return the kit to DKMS to get on the bone marrow registry, and then you'll see if you're a match. There is no harm in learning more about the process. You'll be doing a good deed and helping someone in need. Seriously, guys. So pick up your cell phone today, right now, as you're listening, and text DKMS to 50555. All right, let's get back to the episode. What was the sell? Why were you, what was the thing that you were saying loudspeakers, you come to loudspeakers because we'll do this for you? Were you selling something in particular?
I think the bigger sell was just that a podcast in general was a good thing to get involved in, because back then there was still a lot of skepticism about podcasting in general. So I think the bigger sell was why would I want to do a podcast in the first place? And for me, that sell was always because it's something that you control, and it's something that's gonna, and I think this is probably to a degree still the sell today, because everyone we're talking to are people who are interested in a lot of different things and have a lot of different projects and platforms. And it was always, this is the one that's yours. This is the one that you can use, the engine that's going to drive everything else you're doing, whether it's music or TV or movies or writing. You always have this, and it's not going to go away. We don't care about the ratings. You don't have to worry about where you stand with this. This is your vehicle for as long as you want it. And it's going to hopefully have some value into itself, but it's always going to have value in terms of giving you a platform to promote everything else that you do. And that was kind of the basic sell.
You mentioned that there were some things that didn't go right. Was there a particular story that stands out?
Well, the one I still get beat up for a lot is one of the first shows we launched off of Combat Jack Show was a show called Sneaker Fiends with Dallas Penn and Premium Pete. And we had a studio crunch, and they were doing their show, and also Fan Bros. Both of those shows were two of our earliest shows, and I could only get one show in the studio, and I asked Sneaker Fiends, would you guys mind recording from home? If I built you guys a studio, would you guys record from home? And Pete in particular, and I can talk about this because we've laughed about it a lot in the years since, he got very upset and, basically was like, we're not doing the show anymore. You're kicking us out of the studio. And, everything was very wild then. I think Reggie and I also didn't do the best job of communicating it. So that show ended up going away. And if, you look at where sneaker culture is now, it's only gotten bigger. That's probably one that if we could do it again, we would have tried to do it differently.
Yeah, you mentioned communication. I feel like in that leadership role, there's always so many things that you have to work on. And you're growing, right? Because as you said, when you first started this, you guys were both new to this. Was there any other key thing that you would say to someone in that leadership position? Make sure you understand this if you're trying to grow a brand, an organization, whatever.
I think it's just communication, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And it's still a struggle. My background was writing, which is a one-man sport. I would get the material, I'd sit down at my computer, and that's kind of what I had to do. And then I would deal with people when I was done, but I kind of got to go in the kitchen and make the food by myself. And when you're running a network, you're more of a chef with a staff and, everything that goes with that. There are things that you can see that maybe not everyone else sees, and you just assume that they understand what's happening. That's not always the case. So I think in this sort of situation, communication is definitely the key. I'm also not a particularly outgoing or showy person either. By nature, I'm a little bit more laid back and reserved. And I've always felt another thing I don't do is celebrate people well enough. We have some incredible artists and talents that we work with. And, I wish maybe I did a better job of kind of acknowledging that sometimes.
How do you solve for that, though? Do you have other people on your team who play those positions then?
Not really. I think the way it works for me is I think people know I'm fairly genuine and know how I feel about them.
Okay.
Even if there's not a lot of flash around it. But sometimes I got to remind myself, this is the entertainment business. And there's usually a lot of flash around this stuff. So, sometimes I have to kind of remind myself to put a little more effort into that.
What's your take on the other podcast networks? Do you ever get nervous that your talent might say, you know what, I want parties every weekend, I'm about to go to this place? Like, how?
Every day, sure. I mean, since day one, I'm always watching what other people are doing and, worrying about it. But at a certain point, I learned, like, you can't ride that roller coaster every day, because I was riding that roller coaster in the beginning every day. You do the best you can do and you treat people fairly and honestly. I think that's a big piece of it. You just hope that they, respect that and want to stick with you.
So you guys have a network. I'm assuming that it's a business in the sense that you want to be profitable, right?
Sure.
What is your take on revenue and making sure that you guys are staying profitable so that you can keep the business running?
Well, I mean, I want revenue, obviously. Mm-hmm. Like, I want the money. I think it depends on the size of the podcast.
Okay.
I think there's a pretty well-established marketplace at this point for the larger shows. So I think everybody, not just on loudspeakers, like the larger shows are going to do pretty well now. I think, when we started, 25,000 per episode was a big show. That's out the window now. I think what you will see, and what I'm hoping you see, is smaller shows, but with a very niche audience, are able to find the advertisers that make sense for that niche audience, right?
Yeah, and that's so hard because I feel like smaller shows, there's so many small shows with niche audiences now. I know within my own network, the thing is, how do you get those conversations started? Because when you try to go through like a middleman agency, kind of like a mid-roll, you're too small for mid-roll, right? So it's like, do I just pitch like my local people in my town? Like, what kind of tips would you have for that smaller show?
Well, yeah, it's tough because the agencies are already going out and shaking a lot of trees, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not going to be able to shake the same trees that they have because they, truthfully have more to offer. I think you do have to kind of go out and instead of waiting for people to say, hey, you're reaching the audience I want to reach, you have to tell them that you're reaching that audience. So I think really getting all your data in place is a big part of it, and your demographics and your metrics to be able to make the case. Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned local. I think that's a part of it that hasn't really been investigated enough, right? I think local podcasting is going to become a much bigger thing in the next couple of years. Because if you have a podcast that really has a devout local audience and like a strong following in an area, why wouldn't you advertise on that podcast? Newspapers still get advertisements, right?
Yep.
Local radio stations still get advertisements. You can probably make the case that you're reaching almost just as many people as they do. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I mean, I noticed that this is on the sports side, but like I'm from Philly. I noticed that like Sports Illustrated just started a Philadelphia network of Philadelphia sports shows. I think that's interesting.
That's really smart. It's something good to test.
I actually wish I had done it.
And it's also interesting that you say the whole local things. What I find though is sometimes I think the local entrepreneurs have to start getting savvy to what's next too. Cause I try personally. So I have a Toyota Corolla and I went to my local Corolla dealer or the Toyota dealer where I bought the car. That's exactly
what I'm talking about. Car dealers. That's what I've been saying.
Let me tell you though, it was like I was speaking about, like computers to like the first man that ever lived. It was such a hard sell. So what kind of tips would you have for that person who you have to educate the buyer, the advertiser about why they need it?
I mean, the first thing you got to do is hope that there's somebody in that dealership, maybe not the top guy, who actually listens to your show or understands and that they can translate for you, right? If that doesn't happen, I think you just got to make the case with metrics, and you just have to say, listen, I can tell you exactly who you're reaching, whereas terrestrial radio, the metrics aren't quite as good, So I think you have to really try to make a case for yourself. And then I would get like a little proactive, like do an ad for them, right? You don't have to air it, but do it. Put it in the show. Send them an email. This is what it would sound like, and make it sound a lot better than what the kind of generic car ads sound like on regular radio, right? Where the DJ's just reading a script and then it just kind of feels flat. Do something extra, throw a lot into it, tell a funny story. Like you said, they don't understand. So you have to make them understand, but you have to literally lead them by the hand and say, this is why you want a podcast, because you're getting so much more value out of it than you are in any other medium.
And podcasts aren't dying. I think I was listening to your interview on Premium Pete, and you were talking about how the thing that might hurt at the same time is when these bigger brands start entering the advertising space. I think you were talking about like Jaguar, but Jaguar probably only wanting to work with like the celebrities because they know they'll have a reach and they'll know they'll have like a cosign that they know. So it's going to be really interesting as these larger brands, like podcasts are going to be the new like blogs, right? Like everyone's going to have one eventually. That's what I'm even seeing. All these big companies are now realizing that they can invest in talent and they can invest in the space and make a mark and have such a bigger mark than like little old me who's been podcasting for 3 years, right? So it's like, it's going to be interesting.
It is going to be interesting. I mean, I think what you might see is the bigger brands going towards the bigger shows, but all these direct advertisers who are kind of the majority of the space now, they might start to filter down to some of the smaller shows. Mm-hmm. So hopefully. It might just be a waiting game. I mean, that's someone who's pretty smart about all this told me once. He's like, there's going to be a lot of people rushing into this space in the next couple of years, and then it's going to become a really cold winter, and a lot of people are going to fall off, but you just got to tough it out and be one of the people left standing on the other side. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, and they say like most people who start podcasts, they don't even get past like the third or fourth episode. So it might seem like there's a lot of podcasts like on Apple Podcasts, but a lot of them aren't even active. A lot of people aren't consistent and they might post like once a year or whatever it is. So there is still space, I think, for people who are trying to get in, who have really good ideas. What advice would you give to somebody who's trying to grow their reach? Because that's also a big thing. If you don't have like a celebrity who already has a big reach, or if your show is not, let's say, podcast sexy, right? How do you grow your numbers then?
Well, I mean, I think social media is still your best friend, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the democracy in the space is social media. The bigger shows and the bigger brands, they rely on social just like everybody else. So I think, what you have to do is really get your core audience on board and find a way to really get them engaged and interact with them. I think that's a big part of it. I feel like, their favorite podcasts are a conversation, and they'll probably never meet the host, but they feel like they know the host. They feel like they're friends with the host. They have similar tastes to the host, and you really want to engage that and build on that as much as you can, because that creates its own momentum where things just start to spread, because other people sense that community and that kind of shared interest, and then that's attractive to them. Mm-hmm. The other thing is just kind of like with the car dealer, you got to come up with a creative way to get on people's radar using social media. And I think that's what, it can't just be, and this is true for loudspeakers as it's true for you or anybody else. Like, I think we all get into a rut of just promoting, here's a new episode, here's our new guest, here's the link to it. What else can you do?
Barry's always schooling me. She's like, Barry, you got to try this, you got to do this. Like she's always preaching that.
Hashtag.
Have your hashtags.
She's right. She's right. And I think that's really how you can separate yourself. And it's not a light flick switch that you can just flick. It'll be a process. Look, I would be terrified to get into podcasting right now if I was just kind of becoming aware of this space, because it would seem like it's overrun to me right now. So I think you have to really just settle in for the long haul and be committed to it. At the end of the day, you asked me what my sell was. My basic sell, 6 years ago is the same it is now. Do a podcast because you really want to do a podcast. And if that's your motivation, then it'll work out. If you think it's a way to get on or make a quick buck or because everyone else is doing it, it's probably not going to work out. And that's not just true for someone starting their own podcast in their bedroom somewhere. That's true for celebrities too. I've seen a lot of celebrities think, all right, I got a lot of social media followers. It's what everyone's doing right now. Let me start a podcast. It doesn't work like that. People know when you're committed to it or when you're just doing it to do it. So I would say no matter who you are, you just have to really commit to it. And the landscape changes every day. No one knows where this boat is headed. So just, buckle up and try to enjoy the ride.
I think we talked about this at Podcast Movement, but you seem really, really interested in the series style podcast. I know Loudspeakers, you guys had Mogul, which did really, really well. And I think you were talking about you would, if you could go back in time, I think you said you would want to document the rise and fall of Loudspeakers or something like that.
That's going to be our final act. I've been telling people that. I was like, one day the rise and fall of Loudspeakers is going to be the best podcast out there. But I do feel, the more scripted is definitely going to be the way to separate yourself from the pack in the future. Just because, and I think I talked about this there with you guys, I started a podcast network because I could. You started a podcast because you could. The bar to entry in podcasting is still very low. You need a microphone, some computers, maybe a studio, and you can do it. Scripted requires more work, more time, more thought, and a lot more money. Especially. So because of that, those programs are going to kind of separate themselves from the pack because there's going to be less of them and it's going to be easier to curate them. The issue right now is curation. If you go to, and it's like you said, a lot of these podcasts barely are publishing, but if you go to Apple right now, how many podcasts are on there? 300,000? How do you curate that? How do you figure out this is something I'd want to listen to versus this isn't something for me? It's going to be a lot easier to do that in the scripted space because there's just going to be, because of the resources it requires, a lot less shows of that nature.
It's like the genres,
there are already
right?
a lot of them. Yeah, it's like the dramas. Yeah,
kind of it's like a Netflix, right? You can go and you can easily go to Netflix to find what you want. And it's what I always tell people too is when they're on the creation side, look at how these already successful shows, look at how they're organizing things, right? Even if you have an interview style show, do you watch Power?
No.
Okay, well, I'm just using it as an example, right? Good TV shows in the beginning, they always have some kind of preview or some kind of intro to get you hooked, right? And there's always some format that works. So sometimes I tell people get creative on the format that you're using, but make sure you have key things, especially when you're starting out, that you need to have in every episode, because you can't just assume somebody knows what your social media handles are, right? If you're starting out, you have to make sure that you're mentioning your social media handles or that you're telling people what you want them to do after listening. The biggest thing I've seen, Chris, on my show is asking people to repost it on their Instagram stories. Sure. I say that. And they do it. But if I didn't ask, they wouldn't do it, right? So it's you have to really leverage your position. Your audience is having this conversation with you in their heads. So talk to them.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say on that note is, and I heard a podcaster, I forget who it was on the Earwolf Network, say this years ago, and I actually transcribed it and was going to email it to everybody, and I think I forgot to do it, but I'll say it now, which is you can never give enough context on your show. Always assume that someone new is listening at the top of every episode. Always set the scene. Always explain who you are. Always explain what the show is about and what's going to happen. And the second you stop doing that, you're admitting that no one new's coming in and the show stopped growing. And you never want to admit that. You always have to provide context. And the audience doesn't care. It almost becomes like a comforting thing to them to kind of hear the same rap at the beginning of every show.
Yeah, like the Casey crew, I love when they have their she's like toodles at the end, or she's like welcome in the beginning.
People like these little hooks that they can hang their coat on every episode, right? You don't want to do it for 3 minutes, but you always want to kind of give the listener that sense of it. You got to build a little theater. This is the start of the show. This is who we are. This is what's about to happen. All right, let's go. And a lot of people just kind of drop in and assume that everybody knows exactly what's going on. But if you assume that, like I said, you assume that the show's not growing anymore. And, if you're not growing anymore, you got a problem.
Yeah, the vision that just came in my head was when you're driving home and you turn the corner and you see your garbage can in the driveway or something, you're home. It's kind of like when I'm listening to a new show and I hear their intro music, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm about to listen to this. So there definitely is. I feel like that's just something in psychology. People are hardwired to like those trigger points. Yep. And it's comforting. It's like home.
Yep.
So one thing I want to ask you is, last question on the whole podcasting front as we wind down, is a lot of people want to work with brands, right? And you have, I think Loudspeakers, you worked with State Farm on that series with Angela Yee, right?
Colorful Lives.
Yeah. How did that come about? Like, is that something that you guys actively pitch, or do you work with the agency to help you get those bigger brand partnerships?
There's an agency called the Marketing Arm that we worked with on that. And it was just pretty fortunate. There was a guy there who was a big fan of the Combat Jack show and the Read, who reached out to me and basically was like, I love what you guys are doing. We got some stuff here that we think you could be a good fit for. You want to come in and we can kick some ideas around. And I think we tried some other things first. I forget exactly what it was, but eventually, the State Farm opportunity came about, and we did Colorful Lives, and we're in our 4th season right now of that. And I was just saying to someone the other day, like, I don't know if that's a record for a branded content podcast, but it's got to be pretty close. It seems like most of those kind of come and go after a season or two.
Yeah, I haven't seen any.
I
haven't seen any do for. I think within the ones that I listen to, they're mostly like just like one season, 10 episodes, and then they're done, right?
One of the things we said to them early on is we're Loudspeakers. Everything we do is very organic. So we'd have to do it in that sort of nature, or else it's not going to seem like a fit for our audience. So they kind of gave us the freedom to make it an organic, kind of free-flowing show, obviously within like a little bit more guidelines and structure. And even in the last 2 seasons, we added a video element, which I think is kind of interesting and has been pretty successful. We also have the Insecurity podcast, which is the official podcast for Insecure, which is now, I guess, as long as the show.
Yeah, 3 seasons.
So, I'm pretty proud of that, too. Fran and Chris will do that, and people love that. Like, that's got to be one of the most popular branded podcasts ever, if not the most. So I think there's a lot of room to grow in that space in a way that, again, feels organic, and it doesn't feel like, all right, we're just packaging something together for a check from this company,
So when you're working with shows, do you pay the talent based upon their shows, or is it just like working with the network? Like does it vary what talent gets across the shows depending upon the specific show? I think I'm confusing myself. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Everything varies, but I mean, generally what we do is like all the shows just share in the profit that comes into the shows, which I think for the most part is kind of the standard system in podcasting.
Okay.
I think it's going to start changing maybe a little bit. I think, that's still the smart bet, because at the end of the day, like the talent wants to own it, Mm-hmm. Like, and I think that's where it's still different in podcasting than in other spaces. It's not like a salary thing. It's generally more like we're partners in the show and we own the show. If the show goes all the way to the top, we're great. And if it's somewhere in between, that's all right too. So there's always a little bit of uncertainty, I guess. And I think that's probably one of the frustrating aspects of it, for the talent and also the network. No one really knows what's going to come in when.
Yeah. So I guess you have to really make sure that everyone's protected, like from a legal standpoint too, like with contracts and everything is kind of clear in that regards, right?
Yeah. And that's something, it took us a long time to kind of figure out, because again, when we started, there was no money. So there was who cared about any of that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. We were just doing it to do it. And then as the money came in, all right, everything's got to become a little bit more buttoned up. But that's kind of the nature of the industry in general, I think.
Yeah, and the evolution of when you first started, you knew nothing, right? And as you know, I think there's a Jamaican saying. So my parents are Jamaican. Well, it's not a Jamaican saying, but it's just one. I'm thinking of it with a Jamaican accent, right? They're like, as you know better, you do better, right? So it's better, like, yeah. So let's as we kind of wind down, right? We've been reflecting upon your journey, and I know, like, through this whole thing, I know, like, even in my own podcasting journey, it's sometimes hard where you're public facing, right? But at the same time, you're dealing with real shit at home, right? Like how do you manage that? I know that recently, I think it was last year, you shared that you were struggling with Lyme's disease, and how do you manage that and still have enough energy to just keep everything moving?
It's been tough, to be honest with you. You know, especially because for me, you know, Lyme's, and I'll try not to take everybody down like a Lyme's, you know, black hole right now, but it's a disease that like manifests itself in a lot of different ways, and it changes a lot. But one of the kind of steady symptoms for me has been like really bad fatigue. You know, so it's I don't know. Have you ever taken like a trip to like Asia, or, you know, like a 15-hour flight or something?
No.
And you get
the most I've gone to is London. So that's like 7 hours.
Think of like the worst jet lag.
Okay.
And you just get that. And it could be 3 days in a row, or it could be twice. You just don't know. So it's been a struggle, in that regard, just to kind of figure out how to balance that with everything else that's going on. And, you know, like when I first got diagnosed, you know, I've always been someone like, you get sick, someone tells you, okay, you're going to take this medicine and you're going to be better in a week. You know, you got a strep throat, take this antibiotic, it'll be better in 7 days. You got a sinus infection, whatever the case may be. And there's not really an answer for that with Lyme's. It's kind of a process, and you might get better. You might never really get better. You might get 75% of the way there. So that was tough for me to kind of wrap my head around, because when I first got diagnosed, I was thinking, all right, I'm going to be better in a month, 2 months. Okay, it'll be 6 months. All right, it's a year. And now I'm just like, this is the reality of the situation. I just got to kind of live with it and do the best that I can to kind of, you know, support myself. The flip side of that coin is it makes me appreciate stuff a lot more.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, how has your perspective on the business and just life in general changed?
You know, I talked earlier about like the roller coaster. What's this network doing? What's that show doing? What's going to happen with this show? I used to get really emotionally invested in that. And I don't want to say that I don't care. I still care very deeply. But I'm like, I don't have to ride the roller coaster is when I'm realizing I can watch it. And I can prepare, and you do the best you can do, and then you got to just see where the cards fall. And I think what I've realized is when you're not firing on all the cylinders you want to fire on, you just can't afford to kind of get that emotionally caught up in a lot of stuff. And then, you know, also truthfully, you know, when Reggie passed last year, you know, I think when you go through something like that, you come out on the other end of it, and you're like, if you're healthy and you can see your kids every day and just have a life on that level, you're winning, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say I'm not competitive about this podcasting stuff. I'm very competitive. I want to keep doing more stuff. But to see something kind of like that tough up close, and to realize how fortunate, you know, I am just to have, you know, my kids and my wife and my family, like, I'm doing all right.
Thinking about the legacy, I think I was reading this article, like it's like the I forgot the name of it. Oh man, but it was a really good title. The House That Combat Jack Built. I think that was the name of the article. Thinking about the legacy, right? Like I feel like you both had unique strengths, right? What do you think was Reggie's strength, and how are you hoping, or how are you making sure that his legacy still lives on with the future of the network?
Well, you know, I think Reggie's strength in comparison to me was he was a people person. Reggie could walk into a room and kind of captivate the room, make everyone feel great, bring a lot of energy to it, kind of get people excited about stuff. That's not really my strength. Like I said, I'm a little more laid back. And I think that's what Reggie was really great at, and it came naturally to him. And I think he just also had, like, you know, I've talked about my passion for the culture. Reggie's was just as stronger. You know, Reggie, this was the essence of what he was about. So he always brought that to the table. And, you know, in terms of his legacy, I just hope people really understand the significance of it. And, you know, I even saw some people, there was an article about Joe Budden's podcast signing with Spotify in the New York Times last week. And I saw some people upset saying, you know, well, how come they didn't mention Combat Jack in that article. I get it. It was about what Budden's doing, and I think he deserves kind of the accolades he's getting right now. I don't think you have to talk about Reggie necessarily in that article, but I do hope that people really remember the impact that he had specifically with the Combat Jack show, because it was not sexy back then. Mm-hmm. Let's not do revisionist history. Like, a lot of artists didn't want to come on a podcast. A lot of artists didn't want to be associated with a podcast. A lot of artists saw that as a sign that they couldn't make it on the radio, that they were slumming, right? And I think Reggie really changed that perspective. And I think Reggie, because of the knowledge that he had and the passion that he had about the music and the culture, he created a space where they almost couldn't say no. And they had to come and talk to him just because what he was doing was so great. Now I love seeing other hip hop podcasts doing well and reaching wider audiences, but I do think it's important to remember it wasn't too long ago that a lot of people didn't believe that this day would get here. So I think we have to collectively always kind of keep that in mind about the impact that he had on it.
Yeah, people also need to do their research. I hate when, if you want to start a podcast or whatever field you're in, make sure you understand the founding fathers and whatever industry it is that you're doing. Cause I feel like that can also inform how you approach your work. And I don't want to go on a tangent here, but you said something that was so interesting, was about how a lot of the artists didn't want to come on in the beginning days. How did he get people? How did he get people to come on who didn't want to come on? At the same time, how can people who are podcasting now or whatever it is pitch people who are how can they get a yes when they're more than likely going to get a no?
Well, you got to have the passion, right? Mm-hmm. And that passion will come through, whether it's in the pitch or the episode that you send them. And that's what Reggie had. And look, truthfully, he started by interviewing, the majority. It was old school rappers who, maybe hadn't had a hit in a while, but he was able to treat them with the respect. Those guys, they just want to be respected because they're pioneers too, right? And they want someone to come in and give their story the context it deserves and the accolades it deserves. They want that 2 or 3 hour interview. And I think that's where he changed the game, is he really did those long, in-depth interviews where you started with somebody's childhood and you worked your way all the way up to the present. And that's what a lot of those guys deserve, but weren't getting. When he did that, I think, because ultimately the artists that are hot today or hotter, they respect those guys too. And over time, when they started to hear those interviews, it made them say, all right, we gotta participate in this. But if you go back, you'll see there were a few episodes, specifically, I think with Ebro, when they even went to Hot 97, the debate was why should anyone care about hip hop podcasts? This doesn't matter. Terrestrial is still king. And I feel if you tried to have a show like that today, people would almost laugh at you. Why are you even talking about this? Of course, podcasts matter. I think the question more is what's going to happen to terrestrial, if anything. Yeah, now the radio stations are, they're on YouTube, they're syndicating on they have the little podcast. Yeah, it's now they're trying to get before they're not relevant anymore. I'm not talking 10, 15 years ago. I mean, I don't remember when these episodes were, but they had to be 5, 6 years ago at the most. That was a very real conversation. This movement isn't going to last. Why should we, the institutions, take it seriously? Today, it's the whole different song. But I think, the reason, to get to your question of how do you communicate that, it's just got to be the passion. It's just got to be this is a subject matter that I care about so much. I breathe it every day. Look, there are a lot of people out there, what's the term now, clout chasers? There are going to be people like that. They're only going to do your show if it has a certain amount of number, or if they think politically it's in their favor. But there are also people out there who just recognize passion. I mean, look, I talk to you. I can see you're passionate about podcasting. I'm going to do the show because I know I'm talking to someone who really cares and spends a lot of time thinking about the industry and cares about it and what direction it's going. And I think no matter what field you're in, there are people like that. Not all of them are like that, but you'll find enough.
So what should we as creators be on the lookout for? Is there something that you could see is coming around the corner, but no one's paying attention to it?
I think it's I don't know how to pronounce the word, corporatization. It's going to get more corporate. That's what I'm trying to say. Like that, I don't think that's exactly a news flash. I think everyone kind of sees that coming. It's just going to be people trying to figure out how do they fit into that space. And, you know, if you feel like you are going to get squeezed out, you know, my advice to people would be find that niche then, because the niche is never going to go away. You might not be able to scale it to exactly where you want to go, but, you know, the niche is going to be there. There's going to be a podcast for everybody, no matter what their interest is in the future. You know, what's the famous quote? Everyone will be famous in the future for 15 minutes. In the future, everyone's going to have a podcast for them in 15 minutes in the future. No matter what you into, you know, like if I just want to listen to podcasts about Philadelphia basketball history, I'm going to have that. It might already be out there. No matter what you're into, no matter what the niche is, there's going to be something for you. The question is just going to be, how do you monetize that? Can you make the niche big enough that you can connect with the advertisers? And then, you know, I'd say the other side of it that's coming around the corner is, I don't know, you know, what are 16 and 15-year-old kids listening to?
I feel like, I don't even know either. I feel like they're all on YouTube.
I don't think but they're going to my college reunion this summer. And, you know, we're the old people in a tent. And at some point, 3 kids wandered over who I guess had just graduated. And they just kind of were talking to us, I guess, just kind of like almost probably as a joke. Like, let's see what these people are up to. So we're talking to them. And at one point, I'm like, look, I'm just curious. Like, do you guys listen to any podcasts? 20, 21-year-old kids. And all 3 of them were like, nah, not really. And I was like, why not? And they were like, well, you know, if I'm not studying, I don't want to be like that committed to some type of show. Like, I'd rather, like you said, just go on YouTube and like watch reality shows for half an hour or something like that. And I was like, not during your commute? And they're like, well, we don't commute, you know, like we're in college. So I was like, like it doesn't feel like it's really caught on with that set yet, but it's going to. And whoever can figure it out, they're going to be in a sweet spot.
I'm just here thinking, like, what would make a 15 and 19-year-old want to listen to a podcast, right? Like,
what about going to the gym, though?
What do you mean? Like, what's the question you're asking? Like,
I'm just curious why I don't want to say no kids are listening, because I get sent a lot of screenshots of people like listening to the read. They're like in the lecture hall, but they're listening to the show on their computer. Like, I see a lot of that. So people are definitely listening, but I do feel like it hasn't caught even high school kids. Like, I don't feel like that's what they're about quite yet. And I'm curious why that is.
Because when I was in high school, but I graduated from high school in 2009, I had an iPod, like, you know, the old school iPod. So I was listening to music, but I wasn't really listening. I don't think I had, like my interest was more in like what's happening right in front of me, like right now, like what will make me relevant among my peers. So unless there's a way for there to be some like social gamification of it, like, I get some points from like, I get points for listening to this show that will help me.
I know everybody else is listening to this. All the cool kids are listening to this. Whereas, I guess when you get older, you gravitate towards the stuff that you care about and you're not quite as concerned.
What's going to help me in my life? Like, what's going to help me progress? So maybe like that college age student. But it's funny because that podcast movement, Pat Flynn, he launched a podcast with his son, right? I feel like the younger kids, like the really young ones, like let's say like 6 to 10 or 11.
Yeah.
All of them, if you give them a phone, like my little niece or my phone, I have so many vlogs that she does, right? She'll just sit there and she'll talk to the video camera. She'll talk, she'll take it and like say, this is my cat. This is my house. Like there's an opportunity, I think, for like micro recording of some level for that younger age round.
Right. But then you're going to get to the question of, okay, well, how do you monetize it? Right.
You can't sell car dealers. You can't tell car dealers, hey, I'm going to have your, advertisement for 6 to 10-year-olds.
No, but obviously a lot of people spend money on trying to reach kids or family. And look, Gimlet's tried to do a kid show. I think Panoply did it. Like a lot of people have tried kid shows. I just think it's like there's not that one space where all these kids are going to, that it's going to make sense for them yet, if that's a way to explain it. So I think everyone's still trying to figure it out, but when they do, someone's going to figure it out. And like I said, they're going to be in a sweet spot when they do it.
All right. So last question, Chris. I'm just going to give you 2 words before we get to our lightning round. 2 words. Answer it however you want. All right. These are the 2 words. Please stop.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Please stop.
Okay.
Like, what do you want people to stop doing?
Oh, I thought someone was saying to me, please stop.
No. Meaning,
stop.
like, what do you want people to stop doing when they're, whether in your own network, like, please stop doing this.
Oh, man. Squabbling over the small picture. People, I would like people to kind of try to see things from the 30,000 foot view sometimes. Not that they don't, but more often, because I think people can get very caught up in the he said, she said, and that sort of stuff. I feel like I spend a lot of time dealing with that. And I think if people could pull back a little bit and see the big picture more, they might let stuff go.
Well, thank you so much. Let's get to our lightning round. So this part of the interview, I'm just going to give you a really quick prompt, and I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to mind. And we're sticking with our whole dreams and drive metaphor. So these are going to be like the gear shifts in a car, okay?
Right.
All right. First word is park.
Park. I've made it. I'm home.
Reverse.
Just what it sounds like. I'm going in the wrong direction.
Neutral.
Neutral. I'm kind of stuck. Maybe I feel like that with limes a little bit. I'm kind of stuck in neutral. I definitely don't want to go in reverse, but I'd like to put it in drive and park and get home and get out of this shit.
And then I guess the last one is drive.
Drive, the future, like forward, like health, you know? I know this is, you know, a podcast about the industry, I guess, in some ways, but like health is wealth, people. We've talked about Reggie. I've talked a little bit about the struggles, you know, that I'm going through. You know, I kind of walk down the street and I see people walking down the street and they're stressing about stuff or they're arguing about stuff or they're freaked out. And I'm like, if you guys are healthy, your day's fine. I know that's kind of a simplistic way to look at it. The older I get and the more I experience stuff and deal stuff, like if you can go into the future, if you can drive into the future and have your health, you're winning. Look, we're all competitive. We all want to win in whatever spaces we are. We all want to get our voice out there, and I think that's healthy. I think that's the human condition. But really, A, appreciate your health, and then B, maintenance it. Take care of it. Nothing's guaranteed. A lot of stuff can sneak up on you. It's not as simple as just going to the doctor and taking a pill and you're better. The human body is very complex. I feel like I'm ending this on a bit of a downer, so I'm going to stop.
No, don't, because I feel like I don't think it's a downer, because I think sometimes I was thinking I just posted this a quote on my Instagram stories today. Sometimes we all spend so much time chasing the dream that we aren't really taking the time to invest in what it means to be able to live it, right? You can chase it, but you can tire yourself out, not check up on your health, not take care of yourself. So let's say success comes tomorrow, but you can't enjoy it because you just tore yourself down in all regards of in all areas of the word, you know?
Like that's something, you know, I spent a lot of time with Russell Simmons working on these books, and, you know, obviously he's going through his situation now, but one of the things he taught to me, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, he's like, listen, I know a lot of billionaires and every single one of them is unhappy. I've also been watching Succession on HBO. I don't know if you've been watching that, but so that pretty much is that show in a nutshell. But it is true, like success, and I would add this for like the younger people, social media, that stuff isn't going to make you happy, you know?
It'll make you more sick. It'll have you depressed,
I think there's going to be a big, the pendulum is going to come flying back fast in the other direction. You know, my daughter's about to start middle school. We're in New York. She has to take the subway every day. She wants a cell phone. And I'm like, I'm not getting you a smartphone. You know, you're getting a flip phone for safety, and that's it. You know, she's trying to make the argument. I'm like, you got to understand, this stuff is making people sad. I haven't been on Twitter in a long time. Like, I'll go on and kind of just cruise around and like look up some of our shows and just see but I kind of checked out because it wasn't making me happy. You know, I was spending a lot of time on it for sure, But I was like, what was I getting out of it? Like, and I'm a sensitive person. Like every time somebody posts something with like some energy behind it, I react to it. I kind of get caught up in it. And, you could look at 300 posts like that a day. It's pulling your energy in all sorts of different directions. So I would just say, like, when I talk about health, I'm not just talking about drinking more water and laying off processed foods and eating greens and all that. It's like, think about the energy that you're giving to social media and think about, like, is that really the best use of my resources?
Right. That's why I feel like this whole like self-care, the business of self-care is becoming such a business now, because it's now becoming a luxury to live in the reality to live in reality. People are so caught up in virtual that you'll pay to not have to live in the virtual world, to get disconnected. So
and if people have said to me, like, if we weren't doing podcasting, what would we be doing? It's definitely something in the wellness space.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe there'll be like a loudspeakers wellness. You never know.
I would say Fran is already, well on her way on that, and because she understands it, she gets it. Yeah, sorry if that was a downer again.
No downer. So here we'll do a picker upper right now for the last segment. Is you can't be a dream driver without your keys to success. So tell me 3 things, Chris, that you think every dream driver needs in their toolkit before they hit the road.
Everything you need in your toolkit. You need focus. First and foremost, you got to, especially now, and I don't mean to make this all about social media. There's a lot of distractions out there. You got to be really focused. You need perseverance because, again, you asked me at the beginning of the show, when you first get your break, 12 years in. That was a long 12 years of knocking on the door, no one ever answering. And I think when people look at someone who's a quote unquote success, it's very easy to write off those initial years. Everybody, for the most part, has that same sort of situation. They spent a lot of time knocking on the door before they finally got in. I actually, one of my things to do is I like to read a lot of biographies of like famous people in the music industry or something like that, because when you get into the weeds of their journey, it never happens overnight. They were always persistent. Sometimes like I'll read these books and I'll say, man, like that's a point where I probably would have given up, right? Or that's a point where I probably would have said, this isn't going to work out. And imagine if this guy who's now so famous and so successful, they don't do it. They just persevere and they keep pushing and pushing. And then I guess, it sounds cliche, but again, it's the passion. You can't have the perseverance without the passion. You got to really care about whatever it is that you're doing. So I think the key is, how do you identify what your passion is, right? And I think what you just have to do is, what's the one thing that when you're doing it, it doesn't feel like you're working? That's the thing that you're passionate about. I work on these podcasts I'm trying to get more sleep, so I won't say 18 hours. But, like I put in long hours. I don't ever feel like I'm working. I could do this all day. There are other types of jobs. I would feel like I'm working every second. So I think the key is you got to figure out what's the thing that you do that you feel good about, that you feel you might not be the best in the world about it, but you have some skill. And when you're doing it, you kind of lose track of time. You're not looking at the clock. If anything, you don't have enough time. When you can identify what that thing is, that's what you go for.
I think that's a perfect way to end. I want to tell people it's all right if you're still trying to figure that out, right?
I'm 47. I don't know what I'm doing.
We're all still trying to figure it out
every day.
Chris, can you tell our dream drivers where we can, I guess you're not on social media as much anymore, but where can they check out the podcast or in Loudspeakers networks, or where can we just find the archive of your social media history?
Okay. Let me look it up. I think I'm Mr. Chris Morrow on Twitter.
Yeah, on Twitter.
Mr. Chris Morrow. Loudspeakers Network is definitely on Twitter. All our shows are on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, Tidal, Google Play, all your usual suspects in terms of the platforms. If you haven't, check them out. I encourage you, I invite you, come check them out. Hopefully there'll be one that you can connect with. And follow Loudspeakers on Twitter. Barry, who we've talked about, does a great job of keeping everybody abreast of what we're doing. And one of these days, I'll probably start tweeting again.
All right, so that's a wrap for episode 173 with Chris Morrow. I hope you enjoyed hearing his dream driving journey as well as his keys to success. If you love that episode, you know what I'm about to say. Please share it with a friend. I love it when you guys are sharing your Instagram stories, tweeting about it, Facebooking it, texting it to a friend. Do whatever you have to do, but just share it with someone that you think can really, really take away all the insights that Chris shared today. Remember, if you want to learn more about DKMS and how you can help save more lives by getting on their bone marrow registry list, please text DKMS to 50555 or go to dkms.org. Remember, we are Dreams and Drive across the board on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so make sure you're following us. Make sure you're using the hashtag Dreams and Drive as well when you're talking about this episode. And if you have not listened to episode 172, I talked all about why I quit my job and what I'm up to next. So please go back and listen to that one if you want to learn more about my story and what I'm up to and what I'm excited most about on this next leg of my journey. Now I'm going to ask that you please hit the subscribe button so that the next time we have a new episode, you get an alert right on your phone or wherever you're listening to this episode today. Our Dreams and Drive t-shirts, crew necks, and hoodies are available for purchase. So if you want to show support, get a Dreams and Drive merchandise, just go to dreamsanddrive.com/shop. That's dreamsanddrive.com/shop. I appreciate it so much when I see you guys rocking gear, when I see you guys buying gear, when I see you guys talking about the show. It really, really does mean a lot to me. I'm so excited about, as you know, with this being a new journey, a new leg in my life, there's so many possibilities that are open up. There's so much freedom for me to just really, really invest more into the show. So stay tuned. We have a bunch of great guests coming up. So keep dreaming, keep driving, and we'll chat again in episode 174. All right? Bye, guys.